closer alignment with the EU. And they wanted eventual accession to the EU. And that's not an opinion, that's just a fact. And you had changes in regime, Yanukovych, etc., in Ukraine, which kind of mirrored that. But there was a strong element, people in the east, people in the south, who were ethnically Russian, or at least spoke Russian as their first tongue, who wanted to more align the state with Russia. Now, if those territories have been cleaved off and now part of Russia, the demographics alone will tell you you have a more homogeneously Ukrainian state. Again, that's not rocket science, that's just the practicalities on the ground. So whether the Ukrainian state is going to be in the pay to America, I would kind of question that in the medium to long term, but they have fought and won their independence away from being part of the Russian sphere of influence. And Wheel made a point, which I thought was quite clever. He said, why are we backing the Ukrainians in this? And Anson, or somebody else kind of, I think it was Marshall, sorry, answered this by saying this was a point of morality and political and geopolitical norms since 1945, that in Europe, countries don't roll over borders and snaffle other people's land. And whilst that is true, the real politique of it is, if this had happened in, I don't know, Asia or Africa, we wouldn't really be that bothered. The West is more bothered about this because A, it's Europe, and B, these countries, the next countries potentially to be threatened are the Baltics, who are part of NATO, and so they get incredibly jumpy. So you have to then understand. Yeah, 1 minute, son. My son's at the door. You have to understand in the wider geopolitical context, the Ukrainians have pushed themselves away from Russian influence. That's a fact.
I just have one question, which is, by giving this land, we achieve what objective?
Peace. You mean getting Ukraine?
Yeah, by giving away portions of Ukraine, again, ignoring the resource-rich nature, we receive peace. Because I'm not much of a historian, Captain, you know more than I do, and have a greater perspective. Has that occurred other times in life where we've successfully given land and it's resulted in long-term lasting peace?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on American history, but I'd say maybe Vietnam, maybe.
There are loads of instances throughout history where there have been peace treaties which have been concluded.
Just one or two, not a lot.
Well, you could go to the Congress of Vienna in 1815 when we defeat Napoleon, and actually what the Allies don't do is carve France up into pieces. Basically, the French national borders of today are the French national borders, which were defined by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and the French were defeated. Like, they basically are the same. So there are loads of examples. Another example of a political defeat over a military one is the American War of Independence. Yorktown did not mean that the British couldn't put any more troops in North America. There were troops occupying New York 2 years after Yorktown. But it was a political defeat. The British just said, us to keep on fighting this is just too expensive. give them their bloody independence. So there is a rationality to a lot of this, which in hindsight makes complete utter sense. It might feel bitter at that moment, but you look at it in hindsight and you say, that's kind of all right. You've got to understand, what were the Ukrainians truly fighting for? Yes, to defend their sovereignty, to keep every inch of land, but they're fighting an asymmetric war. It's not two equal powers going up against themselves. It's much more, there are more Ukrainians per head of the population in the field against the Russians, and the Russians are put in the field against the Ukrainians. Russia is 3 times bigger. It has a much bigger military, etc. That doesn't mean necessarily they're going to win the war militarily. The Ukrainians could keep, just kind of give up. But how long is that going to take, is the question. And do the Ukrainians have the political will to keep on fighting? Do they have the economic heft to keep on putting those troops in the ground? Do they have the manpower, etc.? And will their allies keep going? And this is an interesting question which has been brought up by somebody before in this room, about talking about the European perspective. And this is where I slightly disagree. Americans generally kind of think that NATO is completely an American-backed thing, and it is an American-backed organisation. However, with the accession of Trump, what has happened to NATO is that all of the NATO countries are now spending much more on defence, even Germany. So there is a very clear difference between European support for Ukraine and American support. Is that European support enough to substitute for American? No, not yet. But there is a scenario, I would say it's not likely, but there is a scenario that the Americans could just say, fuck it, doesn't really matter. And the Europeans kind of just say, no, we're going to keep going with this, Macron, Starmer, and the new Chancellor of Germany. It's not that plausible, but there is one way that the Ukrainians could keep going. But for what? They're not going to roll back anytime soon the losses that have been made to Russia. There needs to be a political view that these lands have been lost, but we have gained our independence away from Russia.
Royfield, I think everybody know at this point that it's not Ukraine versus Russia per se. I think it's, of course, everybody knows it's NATO against Russia in Ukraine, which is completely different. We're talking about Ukraine. Ukraine could have been finished already, let's say, in a matter of a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months.
That's not true. That's not true. There's a large elements of truth to what you're saying, but that initial push by the Russians, where they thought they could just go down from the north and be in Kiev in 2 to 3 days, what stopped them wasn't NATO. That was this will and the resolve of the Ukrainian army. And, to be honest, the incompetence of the Russians, because they thought they were just going to go in and in effect have a coup d'etat and put a Russian-leading government there. They were not properly prepared for a long war. So they just trundled in. But it was the Ukrainians' fortitude and determination which turned them back. It absolutely was. Don't get me wrong, what has kept them going has been NATO arms, which is really a pseudonym for American arms. But initially, do not underestimate the fighting resolve of fighting for your homeland. It's one of those massive imponderables when you look at wars. Which is the reason why...
Did you say it's ponderable?
Yeah, it's one of those things you can't factor in. So
That's
you
a
can
good word. I've never even heard it.
Welcome to British English, my friend. We have many of these types of words which you Americans can only but dream of. But when you can look at so many instances of countries that go through a revolution and then are invaded by a neighbour, the neighbour thinking that this country is going to be weak, and it utterly gets turned on its head. Big example, Iran-Iraq war, early 1980s. Saddam Hussein invades Iran thinking, I'll get these oil fields in the southwest, because the Iranians have gone through a revolution. They don't know the arse of their elbows, but filled with revolutionary zeal and the fact you're fighting for your homeland, the Iranians pushed them back. You could do the Vietnam War, which is exactly the same type of thing, goes on and on and on. So don't think that the Ukrainians were just propped up by Western arms, because no, their battle hardiness and their strategic nous is actually truly their own, because they're fighting for their homelands. They've seen their homes destroyed, etc. And it's a massive, as I said before, military imponderable. You don't know how strong people will fight when the backs are up against the wall when you're defending your home.
I think there's an opportunity here, at least for the United States. We're witnessing sort of a transition from an old conventional kinetic war to a highly technology-based conflict where the more technology is used, the fewer people are being lost on the battlefield, or at least that's a perspective, certainly a Ukrainian perspective or a bias from a Ukrainian standpoint. They're substituting drones for soldiers and having great success recently, 3 months, 60, 90 days, something like that. But why maybe perhaps is the U.S. so reluctant to flux a little bit of technological might if we're so damn sophisticated and mighty, is maybe my question. Like, why you don't see a chess master forego an opportunity to sit down at the board and move some pieces? Why are we so reluctant? Why are we so, shall I say, cowardice?
Let's not forget that this is the cheapest it's ever going to get to kill Russian soldiers. And for that alone, we got to weigh that in. Anson, you want to get some final thoughts here?
Yeah, I finally voted. I'm sorry the poll's still not up there, but I finally voted not to give an inch, but I say that de jure. And this is where I suggested earlier that we can maybe achieve peace with a de facto temporary cessation of land, i.e. have an armistice on the current battle lines, and then not cede land de jure through an ultimate peace treaty. In other words, a Korea-like situation. That could be an outcome of the war, and in then trying to figure out the final boundaries for a peace treaty would take extensive negotiations, recognizing something that I think Royfield has introduced, that Ukraine before 2014 was 25-30% Russian and the rest Ukraine, and now they are essentially 100% Ukraine with very little Russians in the current territory that's controlled by Kiev. And that means something, but it counters the moral stance of it's immoral for a country to invade another country and gain any land. And I don't know how you convince, and Royfield also said that's really just a European situation, European slant Eastern Asia or Western Asia situation, if you don't consider Russia European, and that people gain land all the time through wars in the Middle East, in Africa, and all over other places of the world. And the final thought that I would have is that this idea of Russia invading Europe if they gain traction in Ukraine. The last time I checked the map, the Soviet Union did not invade Europe, and they owned all of Ukraine. So I'm not particularly concerned about the considerations of if Ukraine does de jure give up land, that automatically means the next war is going to be across a NATO boundary. I'm not sure that argument holds much. That bucket holds much water. But it's a tough one. I don't have any firm convictions on this thing, one way or the other. But I can wrap it up with a de facto armistice ceding land, holding in abeyance a de jure peace treaty ceding the land legally such that world maps are drawn with new boundaries across the country of Ukraine. And I will also add that I don't think Putin will go for that kind of he's going to want a de jure. He's not going to settle for a de facto, and he may just keep fighting unless he gets a de jure peace treaty out of this thing. Good room. Again, good discussion. Thanks for doing it, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everyone, I posted up top. You guys might want to RSVP. We're going to do the official money bomb for John Kitover for Congress. It's going to happen at 5 o'clock Pacific time, about an hour and a half from now. So you guys might want to RSVP for that. Thanks for showing up. Make sure you join the Rational Discussion Group. We'll be back here 5 days a week talking about these things, and we welcome everyone to join. It's the fastest growing house on the entire app. Thank you very much for participating. Have a good day.
Hey, I wanted to thank everybody. I just set up a campaign to contribute to candidate Congressman John Kitover. If you do want to join that room and you do want to give $1 or $200, I would greatly appreciate it, because that money will be used to recruiting on the ground people to get signatures on these ballots so we can get on the March primary. If you do want to contribute, that's what the money will be used for. And then any residual money will be used for media buying and paying maybe another Clubhouse user, Augustus, to create creatives for the media buys. So, hope you enjoyed this. This has been Rational Discussion Group. I can leave this room open if you want and mod everybody else. Replays are on. No reason to kill a positive vibration. But I've been working in my other office getting an event page set up and a donation page set up. It's pretty easy. If you want to invite people to this room, feel free. The official John Kitover Congress Money Bomb link is pinned above. It starts in an hour and 24 minutes. So that's 7 Central, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you go to johnforcongress.com, or I will pin the link here as well. Let me see if I can get it. It's on my X account. Let me see if I can